So Cursor just launched Cursor 2.0, which essentially is a new model called Composer, a bunch of interface changes which are interesting too. And I think it really speaks more to what's kind of going on the industry as well for AI startups, for token consumption, and really I think whenever you see a major launch from one of the leading players, you kind of see a little bit of the tea leaves of where things are going. Um, and that's also, not to take away from what they launched, which is I think really interesting. So we're going to look at a couple different things here. So we'll run through everything that's new. We'll look at Composer, we'll look at the new agent interface and the browser tool, which I think is actually quite interesting. We'll look at how it was built, and some quotes from the Cursor team, and a couple of interesting things they decided to not say about the model. And then what this kind of means, kind of looking forward, some general thoughts. So jumping in, we'll start with Composer. So Composer, or also I guess it's also Composer One. Um, it's a in their words a new agent model, which I think is to differentiate itself from the Tap Complete model, but a model that's designed to take on agentic tasks for software engineering. And the biggest thing is that it's really really fast. And in this kind of hilarious chart here, um, we see best frontier. These are your 4.5s, your GPT fives, and then the big thing that they're pushing here is speed, and we'll come back to this later. Um, but it is crazy fast, and we'll pull it up in a second as we look at the agent interface. So, agent interface. It's kind of been there for a little bit with background agents, but basically what it allows you to do is kick off many agents in parallel. So you could have one agent, you know, refactor some part of the code base while another agent adds a new feature to a different part of the code base, and they work on different Git work trees, so there's no conflicts. I mean, Git work trees have their own kind of issues and are just kind of weird to mess around with, and I don't think a lot of people have a lot of experience with them, including myself. But you can also, instead of having different tasks, you can have a single prompt run across different models. And then, yeah, there's the browser tool, which uses MCP to like do browser things, which is really interesting. It's built into the IDE. So let's check this out. So this is the new agent interface. And like I said, if you've used background agents, this kind of looks similar. But, it's like chat on the left. You can create a new agent. In this case, I took one agent, or excuse me, one prompt for this application that I have. So I'm basically in the settings panel, add a referrals page to generate links, track referrals, just do like the front end real quick. And I ran it across Composer, Haiku, and Grok Fast. And just so we'll do it again. So you can come in here. As I mentioned, you can kick off many of these at the same time. I think you can do up to 8. So we'll do this. Click this drop down. Use multiple models. Sure, and we will see how fast these each go. These are all pretty fast models. And I think Composer is actually still, I don't know, Grok's got its to-dos. Okay, we got to-dos. And it's cool, you can kind of see everything that's happening while it's going, but look how fast it is just like flying through here. That's generating code, that's not even just reading it. Haiku's still loading. Two out of 4. Yeah, it's done. I broke something in my local host, so it's actually not gonna pull up the correct one. Actually, let me see. Oops. Let me try something. I broke something in my auth config. And I don't feel like doing that right now. We'll come back. The most important thing, what do we want to do here? That's not, whatever. We'll just skip that for now. But it finished. Haiku's still going. What's Haiku doing? Yeah, it's just taking much more time. And Haiku is kind of the fast model, so you can imagine how much faster this would be compared to something like Sonnet. And so then you end up in a case where you have 3 different options. In this case, I'm kind of just doing UI stuff, which I think actually is like really set up well for this. But basically just throwing 3 different models at it. You can open up the terminal for this work tree, which I think is probably the most useful bit. That's way too small. And then you can just npm run dev or whatever to start the server for the specific terminal or kill other processes that you have. You can set up the whatever like things you want to run automatically in the like work trees config. Output is helpful just to see what's happening. If you need to like debug certain things, like I had to tweak my like work trees config so you can see anything that's happening in here. Was that 9:15? Yeah, so this is it. Yeah, so it's restarting Vite, getting convex up and running. The debug console, I haven't used this for anything. Yeah. So yeah, you can see you're in the terminal for this specific work tree. We can come back over here, open terminal for work tree, and you can kind of move between them pretty easily. It's like a little bit of a challenge sometimes if you're not familiar with like Git work trees, and like getting your like work trees config up and running can be like a little annoying, but whatever. Cool. Review, I think, just pulls up the code changes. Yeah. This is a little bit better than what it used to be. You don't need to see like all the files. It's only showing you like relevant files, which is good. So I think this is really cool. I mean, there's a lot of use cases where I think come to mind of like where people and like myself would be happy to throw more compute at the problem and see different solutions that are proposed just to even get my ideas going, and then pick the best one and like go in that direction. So I see the one prompt many models to be more compelling than the like many agents working on different things at the same time. But I think there's probably a bunch of use cases for that as well. And then the browser, I think I should open something up. Yeah, so gives you embedded, or it can open up a Google Chrome tab. I've done it through the Chrome tab just because I like to have that up separately. But basically, this gives it access into it. And let's see. Really helpful for basically just so you don't have to copy over like console logs. I feel like is the going to be one of the main use cases here. But you can also have it like click and look and do things until something like works if you define the end state. So we could see I asked it to check the console logs, and I think this is an MCP call. I'm pretty sure it is. I forget though. Maybe if it goes outside of the IDE. Let's see. Yeah, just some dev tools warning, stuff like that. So that seems helpful. Like I think especially when you're like, debugging something, and you're setting up a bunch of logging to go to the browser. Now you can like kind of skip the step of copying things over, and the model will just have that in context. So that's I think really helpful and a low key part. The browser tool has been here for a little bit, but now it's like better and generally accessible as well. Cool. And yeah, so here are the 3 referral pages that spun up between those models. Tell you which models are which in a second. So Grok for fast just kind of aired out. It's only one call, so like whatever. This was Composer. Looks good. I mean, it looks fine. It's like pretty basic. Like this seems like like a Claude like Sonnet 3.5 sort of thing. This like delete is like not the delete button that's like used throughout the app, and like I don't think that's compliant, like AA compliant with that font and background. And then this was Haiku, which like looks okay, but yeah, like huge. Like why is the button this big? So I would say like the distance between 4.5 Haiku and Composer is like not massive, which I think is like really key, and like a kudos to the Cursor team for doing such a great job with the model. So speaking of the model, how it was built, so big emphasis on reinforcement learning, and the key point is they didn't mention if this is like a fine tune of an open source model like Llama or Quen, and they were directly asked this in like a Hacker News thread, and they kind of danced around it, which we'll look at in a second. Big emphasis on keeping devs in flow, which is why they want it to be really fast, like similar to how tab complete keeps you kind of in the flow. They wanted the Composer model to be really fast in that way. They ran it across Cursor Bench, which is their like proprietary data set, which they don't release so that LLMs can't train on it for the most part. And so they focused not only on the like correctness but also adherence to code base. It's hard to kind of know without like seeing the benchmarks. Big emphasis on using tools in parallel, which I've seen in practice. This also really speeds things up. So rather than having to call 5 tools in sequence, it will do them all in parallel. Reducing fluff in responses, so it won't be like the Sonnet models or any of the Claude models that kind of feel more warm in like a good way, I would say. And that in the reinforcement learning process, it kind of picked up new behaviors of its own, like fixing linter errors and things along those lines. And so this was the kind of base model, which we have no idea what it is. I think it's pretty safe to assume it's some, Llama Quen type of model. Base, and then after the reinforcement learning, in terms of parallel calls versus serial. So we'd see parallel increases, and then Composer uses more search and file read tools to relative code updates. So before reinforcement learning, it was more writing, maybe premature writing, and now it's more search and read before writing. And then this was the process. So as the compute increased, the dots here represent Composer, and it got better, and that's very close to the best frontier model. Good question is like, why wouldn't you just like keep going at that point? But yeah, let's see. Composer increased consistently. Yeah, more compute, more reinforcement learning, the better, which they also note here. So a couple of interesting quotes from the Hacker News thread, which I will link below. Questions basically like, hey, I like when I can have the model be fast. And the like key answer here is, from them, our view is that minimal amount of intelligence is necessary to be productive, and if you can compare that with speed, that's awesome. So they basically said, hey, we want to just reach some level of intelligence. It doesn't need to be the best, most intelligent model in the world. It doesn't need to be able to solve all these crazy math and science and PhD level problems, but it needs to be smart enough. And after that, it needs to be really fast. So that was the kind of, I would say, the like really what they're focusing on here. And, it has implications for future models and future fine tunes and what other companies could do, but we'll touch on that in a second. Is Composer a fine tune? And this was the answer. Again, kind of dancing around it, but our primary focus is on RL post-training. We think that's the best way to get the model to be a strong interactive agent. So kind of dodged the question. And then I thought this was interesting. The question kind of doesn't really make any sense. Does anyone code with GPT-5? Never had a working cursor, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, this is from Sasha Rush, who is a researcher on Cursor, at Cursor. A lot of people use it. GPT-5 scores very well on all our benchmarks, significantly better than Composer 1. So I just thought this significantly better was like interesting, because if we look at that kind of funny chart up here that doesn't have any, doesn't have direct markers, this is best frontier, which would be GPT-5, and this is Composer. And, I wouldn't describe this as significantly better, but, this just kind of had a disconnect for me. So a couple of like other kind of more market larger thoughts. So around token demand, we are not even close to being able to satisfy the amount of token demand I think there is in the world. Like there's just so much more use cases where we could throw more intelligence at the problem. And this one prompt to many models, I think, is one really good instantiation of that, where like as a user, I'm happy to do that. I think it's a good use case, and I'm interested to see how different models solve different problems and like help me think of different ideas to that. And for Cursor, it's great because it burns, it uses more tokens, right? Like, and that's kind of where you have alignment, where users see more value, and it aligns with usage-based pricing. So I would expect to see this a lot more. I'm wondering if you could do this without Git work trees, or if there's another like way to do this. But I would basically, in any coding tool, you're going to see a lot more of this, because they have, it's good for them, it's good for their users, it's good for everything. So expect to see this more. And then in terms of margins, pre-AI, like a typical SaaS tech company, basically 90% margins. Post-AI, you have to pay OpenAI, Anthropic, whoever it is. So it could be 70, 50, 30, even negative in some case. And this is from Bessemer put out an AI report, which I'll link below. But what they defined as like supernovas, so these are like the top companies, have a negative gross margin in a lot of cases. And so this new model from Cursor, I guess stepping back, like the kind of strategy has been like build something, get everyone to use it, like build a product people love, scale it, don't raise a bunch of money, don't worry about the margins if they're negative or low right now, because a couple of things can happen. Maybe costs will come down for tokens, which hasn't really happened. Even for models that have reduced in cost, the reasoning that we now have with reasoning models is so expensive. So your costs are either the same in the case of Claude Sonnet 3.5 and 4.5 are the same exact cost, or for models that have gone cheaper, the reasoning is just using way more tokens, so your actual like costs haven't gone down. Maybe there's other gains and efficiencies you can find at scale, or with like what Cursor's done, Windsurf has done this too, is to build your own model based on like whatever data you have, and then that cuts out all the money that you're sending to the major model providers. And so then that is a huge opportunity for margin. And so it'll be interesting to see how much usage Composer gets compared to OpenAI and Anthropic models inside of Cursor. And I think it's a really interesting thing for like the rest of the industry. This was already things people were thinking about, but it's a really good instantiation of that. Windsurf, of course, did this, but then they got the whole acquisition thing. I feel like took a lot of like wind out of their sails. Like this, I feel like is the really good first example of someone launching their own model to take away or to increase their margins. And so it does kind of speak towards fine tuning reinforcement learning in general. And if Composer does significantly competes well with these like frontier models, then it's obviously massive for Cursor, and it's important for anyone else kind of in the AI world. And again, we come back to this quote where our view is that there's now a minimal amount of intelligence necessary to be productive, and then once that's basically it. So if the base models of these open source models become this level of intelligence, and you only need to do fine tuning on top of that, that's a huge opportunity for a lot of people. And it made me think of Tinker from Thinking Machines, which is I always botch her name, but Mira's company, and it basically makes like fine tuning and reinforcement learning a lot easier. Their whole thing is like having custom models versus like using stuff off the shelf. And so Tinker I haven't used it yet. It's like private and like hard to get access to, but this might be more and more of the future of seeing this. And so, like Cursor had their own infrastructure to do this, which is like still very costly. So it makes it hard for people who haven't raised like hundreds of millions or a lot of money. But if things like Tinker and other like solutions continue to come out and the process becomes easier, then you'll see more people doing it. The base models become good enough. It becomes, way more attractive to AI startups. And that really don't think this was the case, a couple months ago, a year ago. And so will we see more of those compared to just using the latest, greatest model from OpenAI and Anthropic, or will it be somewhere in between, like most things? So that's the Cursor launch. General thoughts. We'll link a bunch of stuff below. And yeah, we'd love to know what you think.